celebrate the truly remarkable life Jim lived, and in many ways each touched our lives. The plan is to allow any and all who care to say a few words, and to get that process of Illinois Department of Psychology, University of Illinois. And he's going to share some of his thoughts on Jim as a scholar, a colleague, and a friend.
Thanks, Norm, and I'd also like to welcome everybody who came here today. It's really amazing how many people came, some from very far away. But I think that's a real testament to the impact that Jim had on so many people. There's nothing Jim loved more than a good party, so I'm going to try to keep this celebratory as well, although I'm also sad at the loss of my good friend. Let me start with a brief biography. Jim grew up in Effingham, Illinois, which is about 75 miles south of here. And he's probably best remembered there as an outstanding high school basketball player. He won all-state honors. After graduation, he came to the University of Illinois from 1950 to 1954, where his interests in science and human behavior were pursued through a major in psychology, with minors in chemistry and sociology. After a couple of years in the Army, and marriage to his high school sweetheart, Betty, he moved to Michigan State University, where he received his master's degree in 1958, and his PhD in personality and social psychology in 1961. After a few years as a faculty member at Miami University in Ohio and 1 year at Yale, Jim came back to the University of Illinois in 1967 and served with distinction until he retired in 1997. Jim was an outstanding scholar. His first publication was in 1962 with his graduate school advisor, Frank Russell, in Psychological Review. It's not a bad place to start. He published over 100 papers during his career, and his research was funded almost continuously by the National Science Foundation between 1967 and 1998. He was a fellow of the American Psychological Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and also a fellow of the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, fellow of the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science, and fellow of the British Psychological Society, among other honors. He won an Alumni Achievement Award from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences here in Illinois in 1999, and a Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Department of Psychology just last year. In addition to being a great scientist, Jim was a great teacher, and he was especially effective as a mentor of graduate students, many of whom are now leaders in the field. In the service domain, Jim was a member of 10 different editorial boards over the course of his career, and he was very active in organizations such as the Society of Experimental Social Psychologists. And he also made valuable service contributions to the department and to the Illinois campus. He served often on the Department Advisory Committee and on important university committees such as the Research Board and the Strategic Budget Committee. Jim had a huge impact on the Department of Psychology during his 30 years here. Along with his colleagues, he formed the very best social psychology group in the country, with a strong emphasis on group decision-making. He valued rigor and quantitative reasoning above all. One thing I didn't know about Jim until I reviewed his personnel file the other day is that he was a prolific letter writer. His file is filled with long letters that he wrote to department heads over his 30-year career, forcefully advocating positions that were dear to him. He also copied department heads on letters that he wrote to other people, including to WILL, our local public broadcasting station, in which he castigated them for giving airtime to popularizers of science that Jim disapproved of. Leo Bishagley, that comes to mind. So I arrived at Illinois in 1991, and Jim retired in 1997, so we shared little time as colleagues. However, Jim and I became good friends when he discovered that I shared his passion for golf. He convinced me to join the Urbana Country Club, where he and Betty were already members, and we enjoyed many rounds of golf together, as well as many rounds of beer in the clubhouse after golf. We were both pretty lousy golfers, but Jim was just so much fun to be with. He was, as you all know, gregarious, passionate, enthusiastic, and opinionated, but I loved listening to his stories about the department and about other people he knew all around the world. I'm very discreet, however, so I'll keep them to myself. I am a little ashamed to say that I sometimes used his passion against him on the golf course. If he was beating me, I would just casually bring up some topic that I knew he had strong feelings about. And he would get so worked up, he would completely lose his form. I think he knew what I was up to, but he just couldn't help himself. I hope that at some level he appreciated the gamesmanship. Well, I know that there are many people here who want to share their memories of Jim, so let me just conclude by saying that Jim was really one of a kind, and I'm very glad that we were friends. I have many happy memories of us having a drink after golf or having lunch somewhere, with me listening to Jim pontificate on one subject or another. I miss that very much.
Okay, I'll go next. I first met Jim over 40 years ago in 1970 when I began graduate studies here at the University of Illinois, and he became my academic advisor and my mentor. David has reminded us of some of Jim's academic achievements and honors. I'd like to begin by supplementing that a bit by telling you a little bit about the ideas that captivated him and animated his career. Throughout that career, Jim was fascinated with human groups. More specifically, he spent his career pursuing what Floyd Alport once identified as the master question of social psychology: how to relate the behavior of individuals to the behavior of groups. That preoccupation was evident from the very beginning of Jim's career, when he was a doctoral student at Michigan State University. He wanted to show that you could account for the speed with which a group could solve a puzzle by knowing how fast individuals could solve it. That work, which as Dave has mentioned was published in the Psychological Review, arguably the top journal in our field, foreshadowed much of what was to come in Jim's career. As David said, Jim loved the elegance and precision of mathematical models, and he usually found a way of expressing his idea in those terms. This is one of several equations in that first paper. He also liked the idea of using the predictions of those models as baselines against which you could compare actual group behavior. Sometimes these models didn't work, and the model that he started with in his dissertation, that's this top line there, suggested that the group should solve as fast as the fastest person in the group. Those little dotted lines is what groups actually could do, which basically says they couldn't keep up with that model. But that never fazed Jim. He would revise the model and find a way to make it work better. And he came up with a model that said the more non-solver, stupid people you had in the group, the more the fast people got slowed down. That's that model, and it did a perfect job of predicting the data. Those early ideas reached fruition 10 years later in a seminal 1973 paper where Jim unveiled his SDS, or social decision scheme theory. Although it was expressed in what might look like complex matrix algebra, that's what the core equation is, the basic idea was a simple one. Group decisions could often be predicted and understood using simple rules for combining individual preferences. Using this SDS model, Jim and his colleagues were able to shed light on many aspects of that master question of social psychology. He helped us, for example, to understand why it is that groups are usually more extreme and more polarized than individuals are in their decisions. Why and when groups are sometimes more and sometimes less subject to biases and judgment than individuals. Why it is that groups are often better at problem solvers than their average member, and many, many other problems. Applying this SDS model, Jim developed an abiding interest in one particularly important decision-making group, the jury. This is the 12 Angry Men that a lot of you have seen in the film version. Over the next 25 years, his work revealed many of the secrets of this rather mysterious decision-making group. For example, he helped us understand when and why does the size of the jury matter? Does it make any difference in what order juries consider different charges? And how can minorities, even very small minorities like Henry Fonda in that movie 12 Angry Men, sometimes manage to prevail and sway the jury in their favor? And many, many other questions. It's safe to say that in the coming decades, scholars who continue to wrestle with that master question of social psychology, to understand not just juries' behavior, but all sorts of performance and decision-making groups, will build on the insights provided by this remarkable scientist. I'd like to say just a few words about Jim as a teacher and mentor. Jim always referred to his students as the crack staff. Now, when I first heard this, his name called to my mind a crackerjack, spit and polish elite military unit that operated with speed, precision, and decisiveness. The truth was, though, that the military unit that we most resembled was, well, to be honest, the one that Sergeant Bilko had to manage. We were a bit of a ragtag unit of Dobermans, Barbellas, and Ritziks. Every bit as hopeless as the units the young Lieutenant Davis had to manage in the Arctic during his service in the U.S. Army. Several generations of crack staffers arrived at Illinois, green and with mostly mush between our ears, wanting, though, to become crack social psychologists. This is a photo from Jim's Kanaraki, his 60th birthday party, which shows you several of the members of the crack staff, and at the bottom are a few that couldn't be there that day, and I apologize to the few whose pictures I couldn't find as well. We all had the extraordinarily good luck of drawing Jim as our advisor and our mentor. Jim taught us how to think more clearly and critically, how to develop our ideas, how to translate those ideas into sound research, and how to communicate our findings effectively. But we were even more lucky to share a mentor who taught us so many important lessons about the art of living. To have patience with those who are just beginning. To always be supportive, generous with praise and credit. To take one's work very seriously, but to not to take oneself too seriously. To live life vigorously, with a lively curiosity, and always, always with a sense of humor. We may have been a ragtag lot, like Bilko's, but we also had a lot of fun together. And I want to thank Jim for all the laughs. I guess like all of you, I also have many sort of isolated memories of Jim, explaining the strategies he was pursuing to defeat the geese that surrounded his house. Explaining the shortcomings of the French culture and telling stories, sometimes ones we heard before, but always welcome, over glasses of wine or beer. But I have one particularly golden memory I'll share with you. About 15 years ago, Betty saw the movie Enchanted April, and as she so often does, she had a brilliant idea. Wouldn't it be lovely to make a trip to Italy? So a group of us, about a dozen in all, and I can see